perhaps it's hard to find a person who has never heard of Resident Evil. It is known not only to gamers, but also to those who watch the zombie epic with Milla Jovovich or other projects within this universe. Despite the fact that the adaptations, to put it mildly, deviated from the source material, it seems that everyone understands the potential of the franchise. Recently, it became known that another Resident Evil film awaits us, which will finally do everything right. But whether Milla will return in it, whether it will be a complete reboot, and which part of the game series they are going to adapt, we will discuss in the next few minutes. Resident Evil began its journey as a film franchise back in 2002 with the release of Paul Anderson's film of the same name. At that time, the director's project made a lot of noise, becoming one of the most prominent game adaptations of its time, although it had little in common with it. The Resident Evil of the 2000s immediately took a course towards more dynamic storytelling. The first film, of course, resembled a horror, which the games are, but only in certain places. Despite this, each subsequent part moved further away from the source material and delved deeper into unimaginable action. Therefore, the gradual decline in ratings from both critics and viewers was a natural outcome. But at the same time, the last part of the series brought in $300 million on a budget of $40 and proved that interest in Resident Evil still exists. However, something urgently needed to be changed. Paul Anderson directed 6 parts of Resident Evil and grossed over $1 billion in total, but his ideas were literally leading nowhere. Therefore, the 21st year reboot attempt called Raccoon City was supposed to be a new beginning. For this, even iconic franchise characters like the Redfields, Jill Valentine, Ada Wong, and Leon Kennedy were introduced. But the film barely broke even, although it was much closer to the games and sometimes drew plot elements directly from them. However, gamers didn't like it either, and it was criticized for literally everything. The latest adaptation attempt to date ended on Netflix. 3 years ago, the streaming giant ordered a series, also called Resident Evil, with an eye on a couple of seasons. However, it diverged so much from the games that it could have been called something else, and in that case, it might have attracted a new audience. But the creators decided that being part of a large franchise was better than proving their worth from scratch. As a result, the project angered Resident Evil fans and generally performed quite weakly, so it quickly changed course, becoming a miniseries. And it would seem that this is where adaptations could end, but not so fast. Now, it's Zach Cregger's turn to direct his version of Resident Evil. The director of the film Barbarian will not only direct the new Resident Evil, but also write the screenplay for it. Moreover, Cregger has already presented his vision and the first draft, after which several studios, including Netflix and Warner Brothers, began to fight for him. However, Sony proved to be the most agile, as it desperately needs a strong franchise after the closure of its Spider-Verse. Despite the fact that previous Resident Evil films received mostly scathing reviews from critics, they consistently made a profit. Therefore, it is not surprising that a real battle unfolded for them. Even Raccoon City did not become unprofitable, despite the cool reception from the audience, and Netflix's interest in the project only signals a desire to compensate for the lukewarm response to their previous attempt to create a Resident Evil series. In the hands of a rising director who has proven himself in strong thrillers with horror elements, the franchise can indeed finally unfold. It is reported that Cregger's first look is described as more faithful to the original games and horror roots. The director himself has already noted that he has been a fan of the game series for decades, so he understands perfectly well what the new film should be like. In his drafts, he took into account not only the requirements of the fan community, but also made them suitable for a completely new audience. The producers of the upcoming reboot are also heaping praise on the finished draft and say that all fans will appreciate it, and they also call the project one of the most important for Sony next year. It is obvious that the company is making a big bet on Cregger, as it has laid out an impressive $20 million for writing the screenplay, directing, and producing. Such an amount is usually paid to experienced directors with a huge track record. But apparently, Cregger really offered something out of the ordinary, and the studio is doing everything to keep him. Currently, it is planned that the film will be released in theaters in September of 2026, that is, in just a year and a half. Considering the time for post-production and the advertising campaign, there is not much time left for filming, and it should begin no later than autumn. Otherwise, Resident Evil might move to 2027. Right now, preparations for filming are underway, and final edits are being made to the screenplay, and the project is rapidly taking shape. Although plot details are still not disclosed, some information has already leaked online. In particular, information about the cast has appeared. Austin Abrams, whom fans of The Walking Dead probably remember, will take part in the new Resident Evil adaptation. Considering that he was announced first, he will get one of the central roles. As reported, he has not yet signed the contract, but it's a matter of time. The question that surely interests many fans: will Milla Jovovich appear in the new film? The actress became one of the biggest action stars of the 2000s thanks to Resident Evil. However, now it is too late for her to return to her biggest franchise. Therefore, one should not count on Milla's appearance even in a cameo. The rest of the cast is still being assembled, but most likely, lesser-known actors will be cast to avoid inflating the budget. In addition, it is known that the new Resident Evil will be a complete reboot and will have nothing in common with all previous adaptations. And this time, the project will lean toward the atmosphere of the original games in everything, and will not descend into a gory action film. Presumably, the reboot will lead to a large number of sequels, if, of course, viewers warmly receive it. It is expected that the upcoming Resident Evil should finally show the world building correctly and competently adapt the game series after all the unsuccessful attempts. The main drawback of all previous films is that none of them were particularly scary. Perhaps the most memorable was the scene in the corridor with the laser in the first film. It was one of the few exciting and truly tense moments in the entire series, and it was precisely such scenes that the adaptations lacked. Due to the shift into action, moviegoers developed a completely different idea of the franchise than gamers. Therefore, the creators of the new adaptation faced the task of overcoming these discrepancies. Zach Cregger's candidacy indeed bodes well. He has already demonstrated an understanding of the genre where horror does not devolve into mere jump scares. Tension is created through atmosphere and unexpected plot twists. His Barbarian is exactly about that, and the film can be recommended even to those who absolutely cannot stand horror. Cregger will almost certainly steer Resident Evil away from the already familiar action trappings towards atmospheric horror. Although Milla in an acrobatic jump kicking zombie dogs looks impressive, it hardly resembles the source material. Interestingly, a rumor has already spread about which game Cregger adapted in his plot. If Anderson's works were a real mishmash of game ideas and characters, the new adaptation will follow the chronology more accurately. Thus, according to available information, the not-so-popular Resident Evil 0 was chosen for adaptation in the first film. This is a prequel to the main series, the events of which take place a day before the event of the first game. In short, it tells how Umbrella Corporation managed to create the T-virus and what preceded it. There was a place for experiments and various kinds of mutants besides zombies, and fans of claustrophobic horror surely liked the episode on the train. The prequel's finale led to the events of the first game and did without the main franchise heroes. The advantage of such an adaptation is its locality. There will be no need to introduce a whole zombie metropolis and other unimaginable creatures. Although, according to the plot, there is a huge mutated human leech, but even this can be replayed. In general, in terms of atmosphere, the film will most likely resemble Barbarian, with which Cregger successfully coped. And in this regard, the direction for the new Resident Evil is more than suitable. In case of success, the sequel will unfold in the iconic mansion, which will also be a fairly local story, not going beyond horror. And it will already introduce heroes familiar to game fans. Of course, all this should still be treated with caution. But if the rumor is true, the director has chosen the ideal part for adaptation. It is closely related to the original games, but at the same time, it does not retell their events. Due to the fact that the game was released almost 30 years ago, many missed it, and the re-release due to outdated mechanics also did not become popular. Therefore, the prequel's plot will be original content for most, which only plays into the author's hands. In general, expectations for the new Resident Evil are not inflated, but there is potential for a quality project. One wants the franchise to find the right form on screen and be able to expand and grow. True, when it comes to the main heroes of the series, the casting question will become acute. But until then, there are still at least a few years, and for now, we, with fingers crossed, wait to see what Zach Cregger has in store for us. Be sure to write in the comments which part of Resident Evil with Milla Jovovich you like the most. and at the same time, your concerns about another reboot and what you think about the chosen game for adaptation. Well, that's all for today, friends. See you in new videos very soon.